Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Spindler. I'm the director of IncubatorCTX and a faculty member here at Concordia University Texas. I'd like to welcome you today to our virtual webinar, our IncubatorCTX Pitch Perfect Workshop with Danielle Walker. Today's topic is virtual presentations and tips and tricks to help you present more effectively on computer and on camera. I'm honored to introduce Danielle. Danielle brings her extensive teaching background to serve Concordia students at Concordia University Texas. As a passionate motivator, she empowers students to articulate and present their ideas with confidence. She launched and spearheaded the CTX Speaking Center, where she coaches students to gain an edge in their communication skills. Danielle is an expert with 15 years of teaching experience, teaching the fundamentals of communication at the collegiate level. She's also been a coach and a judge for forensic speech and debate teams. Danielle Walker is sought out by national corporations to train their leaders in the art of effective communication. As an innovator in education, she embraces the digital age by developing courses and teaching online nationally. The format for today's webinar will be about an hour. Danielle will give you some tips for presenting virtually, including how to handle the Q&A session. Finally, we'll have time for questions. If you have a burning question, please type it in the chat and address it to all panelists and all attendees. That way everyone can see your question. I'll be monitoring the chat. So yes, if you have a question, just please type it in and I'll be watching for that. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Concordia University Texas and specifically our College of Business and Communication who helped support this event. Since 2017, IncubatorCTX has helped local startup businesses grow and succeed. We provide them with co-working space plus access to mentors, faculty members, and student workers. It's also a place where students learn firsthand about what it takes to be an entrepreneurial leader by attending our speaker series, lunch and learn workshops, and gaining hands-on experience working with our startup companies. Last year, on the auspicious date of 2/20/2020, we launched our inaugural IncubatorCTX Pitch Perfect competition. It was held in the chapel, and 4 finalist teams presented before a full audience, including a panel of live judges. They earned cool swag from our local sponsors, as well as scholarship funds to help pay their Concordia tuition. This year, due to the pandemic, we decided that we would focus on a workshop where we can help you students learn the skills to present better virtually. We feel like even when COVID is over, these means of presenting virtually are going to continue. And so we want to help you be even better than you already are. Before we get started, I wanted to get a sense of a question. So I'm going to launch a poll, and if you could all participate and let us know the one thing that you want to learn in this webinar to be a better speaker. So you should be able to see that on your screen. If you could all go ahead, those of you who are here, and start voting. We'll leave this open for a minute or so just to see what the results are. So it looks like overcoming fear of public speaking has 73% of the votes. That's huge. And then pretty even between engaging your audience and handling questions like a pro. And 13% wanted to know more about confidence through body language. So great. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to stop sharing the results of the poll. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Danielle Walker, who's going to give us some tips for everybody today. So thank you, Danielle, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate that wonderful introduction, and I'm really happy and an honor to be able to do this with Concordia students. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can kind of guide you through a presentation. And as Kristen stated, please save your questions or the chat, and then I will address all questions that you have at the end during the question and answer session. So as I share my screen. All right, so today I am going to talk about the Pitch Perfect format, but I'm also going to integrate it into how to be a great speaker. So it's going to address a little bit of what you all wanted to improve on from the poll. So we're going to talk about how to improve your public speaking skills, but we're going to start off with talking about the structure of the Pitch Perfect uh, assignment and how that applies to being a great speaker. And then we're going to talk about delivery, and that's going to include question answer sessions and just how to overall execute, deliver, and perform a really great presentation. So let's get started. So the overview of my presentation today will start with the motivated sequence, which is a persuasive structure that has been tested over decades for how to give an effective speech that encourages your audience to take action. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to apply that motivated sequence to the components of a pitch. And then I am going to talk about delivery. So how to deliver a pitch, but how to deliver a presentation in general. So we're going to go in that order, starting out with the motivated sequence. So the motivated sequence, as I said before, is a tested technique that's been used for decades in a variety of different industries to motivate people to take action. So if you're pitching or persuading in any way, that's your goal at the end, is to essentially ask your listening audience to take some form of action. So I want to go over those steps to encourage you to follow this structure whenever you are creating a pitch. So the first step is an attention getter. An attention getter is a way to engage your audience, to get your audience interested in what you're talking about, to focus their attention. And it's important to do that first before sharing any kind of content or information. So attention getter is the first step and an incredibly important step. The second step is establishing a problem. So you're going to explain a problem or a need, right? Something that needs to be solved. And you're going to establish that and explain the parameters of that and explain how that problem is impacting your listening audience. Then the next step is to provide your solution. So your solution has to address the facets of the problem that you originally addressed. So the solution is an explanation of how you will fix whatever you established as the problem or the need. Then visualization is imagining the entire scope of the solution and its benefits. So when you visualize for your audience, you tell them why what you're proposing as a solution will work well for them, and you also refute their opposition. So any ideas that they may be thinking against what you're proposing as a solution, you're going to bring that up and you're going to refute that when you visualize. Then the last step is call to action. This is when you're going to ask your audience to do something specific. It's going to be very clear, and it's going to be something that's going to encourage them to take action in a relatively short amount of time. So now that you know the steps of the motivated sequence, I want to explain how those steps apply to a pitch. So let's go into the components of a pitch, and I'll apply each step of the motivated sequence to each area. So in a pitch, you should provide an overview and company purpose, and you should also explain your team and your vision. This is a great, the attention getter is a great place to address these areas, these components of a pitch, because it is almost like your overview and company purpose and your team and vision are almost like an introduction to your idea and to your team. And so your best bet is to structure this as a really great attention getter. This can include a 1 to 2 sentence statement defining your company, a company mission, but all of this should be included in some type of intriguing story. So your job as a group, if you're doing a pitch as a group, your job is to make your overview and company purpose and your team and vision a really great, intriguing story that will captivate your audience and get their attention. Some of the things that you may want to address in your team and vision are bios about your group members, your domain and industry expertise, your passion, intensity, your team culture, your history of working together successfully, a proven track record. All of these things can be integrated into your story, into your overview and company purpose as a means to get your audience's attention. Let's move on to the next. Now, your problem and solution are going to be addressed. So the problem and solution component of the motivated sequence, I should say, are going to be addressed when you're explaining what your opportunity is. So when you're explaining the opportunity, you want to start out with describing the current state for the customer and what the problem is the customer is facing. You also want to address any shortcomings of the current situation, and all of that should be spelled out specifically as a problem that your pitch is going to solve. So when you're addressing it, it's not just a problem that's out in space that has no impact on whoever you're pitching to. You want to make sure that you are showing how that problem is affecting whoever you are pitching to. You have to make that connection for them. Don't make them make that connection. It's your job as a speaker to do that. Then you're going to present the solution. So this is when you'll explain your eureka moment. So why is your company so important to this solution? What will your company or your pitch be able to do to address this problem specifically? Why will it endure? Why will it be a big opportunity? This is your time to address all aspects of how your solution will solve the problem that you previously described. Now let's move on to visualization, which actually has a very big part in your pitch, because most people don't like to hear so much about problems. And they want to hear about solutions, but they will also want to visualize how this solution will work out for them long term. This is how you captivate your audience. This is how you keep them engaged, and you kind of warm them up for what you're going to ask them. So within the visualization portion, your pitch should include why now and market potential. So like, why now? Why is this a good time to do it now? And why hasn't it been done before? And what makes it right now? You want to also identify your customer and market. This is when you're going to address a lot of the marketing aspects of your pitch. How big can this get? How big is this opportunity? The share of the market? How many customers do you plan to attract? If you've noticed that this is painting a picture, visualization is exactly that, painting a picture of everything that your solution can actually do. You as a speaker have to do that work to paint the picture. A lot of times your audience that you're speaking to, they may not see the picture on their own. It's your job to connect the dots with that. So when you think about visualization, think about painting a picture, a long-term picture that will implement your solution. So in your visualization, make sure that you address these components. And let's move on to more that's addressed in visualization. As I said earlier, when you're visualizing the overall picture, you also want to refute opposition. And this is where you bring in your competition and your business model, and you talk about what your competitors are doing. So this is where you're going to address, okay, our competitors currently do this. This is what's offered in the market versus what we're offering. And this is why what we're offering is better. Again, it's still helping them visualize the total picture of what you have to offer. You want to explain how you will make money for them and how the business will thrive and how you will build your brand. All these things should be addressed in reference to opposition. So you want to make sure that you research actual opposition. What areas would your listening audience or the person who you're pitching to say, maybe that solution wouldn't work for me? And then you address that, and then you paint the picture for how that would go well. Okay, so all of these components are present, should be present in your pitch, and this is the structure that you should follow in order to make it most effective for this last step, which is the call to action. So call to action is your ask. What are you going to ask from who you're pitching to? And it can be complex or it can be small, depending upon the severity of what your problem is. But you can include what your next steps are, a 6-month plan, a 12 to 18-month milestone. But all in all, your call to action needs to be specific. It needs to be something that you're clearly asking them to do and take on. And you should have already proved that in the previous steps with your problem, your solution, and your visualization. So now that you understand the steps of a pitch and how to apply it to the motivated sequence, which is the most effective way to persuade a listening audience or to persuade a person who you're pitching to, now I want to take some time and focus on delivery. Since your poll indicated that most of you want to work on becoming better public speakers, I want to talk about how delivery plays a huge part in that. What I've talked about previously has been structure and organization. And maybe, many of you have that down. You're really good at organizing your ideas, and maybe you're really great at writing, but speaking is the area that you want to improve on. And that is called delivery. So I want to talk a little bit about delivery as it pertains to the pitch perfect assignment. But then I'm going to talk about how delivery applies to just becoming a better public speaker overall. So delivery requirements include timing, right? So for the pitch, the assignment that's usually assigned includes a 6-minute requirement, time limit. Time limits are really important when you are presenting. They are established by whoever is asking you to speak for a reason. And in order to be professional and to have really great delivery, you have to try to honor your time limits. The way that you honor it is by practicing in advance. If you haven't practiced and timed yourself previously, trying to wing it during the presentation and meet your time can be incredibly risky. So if you know that you have a timing requirement, the first thing that you should do is to structure your ideas. Well, as I previously discussed, that's a structure. Then practice it and time yourself. Once you realize that you're under or over time, then you refine your content and your delivery to make sure that it meets the required time. That's a skill that comes from speaking. I have to do this all the time, right? Knowing that I have a certain amount of time and I have a certain amount of content, I have to determine how much I can speak or how little I can speak based on my time requirements. So that's what the first thing I want you to consider for delivery. How much time do you have? And then working on preparing for that in advance. The next thing is if you have a question and answer time. So the Pitch Perfect assignment does have 5-minute question and answer. So let's talk about Q&A. Let's talk about how to be effective in answering questions, because oftentimes question and answer session is impromptu, which means you had very little time to prepare for it. Maybe you had time to prepare for your 6-minute presentation. You know that really well. But when it comes down to the question and answer, you may feel a little stumped, right? Because you didn't have time to prepare for that. You don't know what's going to be asked of you. So I want to share with you a really great structure to follow when in a Q&A environment. So the first thing I want you to do is to always take time to process the question that's being asked of you. And a great way to do that is to repeat the question back. It gives you time to comprehend the question completely and take in everything that's being asked. It also allows the person who asked you the question to determine whether you actually understood the question properly, right? So you want to repeat the question. That gives you time to think it through. The next thing that you're going to do is think about your question or your answer structure. So let's say somebody asks you, what are the ways in which this proposal or this pitch is going to make revenue? If you know as you're repeating the question, well, there are several ways that this idea can make you revenue, you are thinking in your brain, it's a 3-part answer, right? So you would say that. You would say, well, there's several ways that this idea can bring revenue. I'm going to specifically talk about 3. Again, this is giving you time to think about the answer. It's also providing structure for your answer. And then you want to make sure that you address all 3. After you're done doing that, you want to summarize. So it could be something as simple as, so those are the ways in which I believe that this idea can bring you revenue. The summary indicates to the listening audience that you are done answering the question, and if they want to ask any follow-up questions, they can ask at that time. So let's go over the structure for answering questions one more time. Repeating the question is key because it allows you time to think of what you're going to say. It also allows the person who's asking you the question to determine whether you've understood the question clearly. Then thinking of the format. Am I going to address one thing? Am I going to address three things? Establishing that in your answer. Then explaining those things and then summarizing. So if you take this structure in answering questions and practice it in any type of impromptu setting, it allows you to get much more comfortable with doing so. And then it's really easy to be able to answer questions. So it doesn't matter what the question is, you'll be able to apply this structure. Now, what if you get asked a question that you don't know the answer to? You should say, I don't know the answer to that aspect quite yet, but I will make sure to get you that answer. What often happens when you get a question that you don't know the answer to is that you might think about winging it, right? Bad idea. It throws you, and your response can be incredibly uncomfortable and awkward. And it's usually obvious that you don't know the answer and you're making it up. You never want to take that approach. If you don't know the answer, think, okay, I don't know the answer to that quite yet, but I will make sure that I get you that answer. So that avoids that awkward time, and the fear that we all have about the question answer session is that somebody's going to ask me a question that I don't know the answer to. You take that fear off the table by knowing what your response is going to be immediately to that. In any other question that you know the answer to, usually the fear associated with it is that I don't know how to structure it. But now you do know. Repeat the question, give the actual components of the question in the repeating of it, explain the components, summarize. Now, again, this is going to require practice. This isn't something that you just automatically can do well without practicing it. But once you get this format down, I guarantee you that the question answer sessions will be a lot less nerve-wracking. All right, now let's move on to the next area of delivery, how to deliver with confidence. You want to strive for extemporaneous delivery. Extemporaneous means conversational. So in a virtual space like I'm in now, the way that I come across extemporaneous is first always looking at the camera. I should never be looking down or reading anything because it takes away from engagement. You also want to make sure that your environment in an extemporaneous environment, especially when it's virtual, is not distracting. So there's nothing that's distracting away from what you're communicating to your audience. You also want to not read. So let's say you have a visual like I do with the PowerPoint. The visual aid is there to give you key points of things that you're going to talk about and remind you of what you're going to say. They're not there for you to read. So if I'm looking at a camera and I'm looking at my visual aid and I'm reading my entire content to my audience, I will absolutely lose them. What you want to do instead is to have key points that you have on your visual, or maybe that you've practiced in advance, that will remind you of what you're going to say, and then you express it in a conversational format. So remember that extemporaneous means conversational, means engaging. And in a virtual space, oftentimes it's hard to be as engaging as it is in person, right? So you want to do extra work by making sure that you're not reading, that you're connecting with the camera, and that your visual aid allows key points to remind you of what you're going to say, not a manuscript delivery where you're reading everything to your audience. The next thing is using visuals effectively. In a virtual space, like I said, it's hard for engagement. So your visual aids should help you communicate your ideas clearly without taking away from you. They should add to you. So graphics, images, mock-ups, all are really great ideas. Mock-ups may not work. Well, actually, you could use mock-ups in a virtual space, but mock-ups oftentimes work best when you are, face-to-face. But you can still find some type of mock-up that works well in a virtual environment. But the key thing about using visuals effectively in a virtual environment is that they should not be distracting. They should not be difficult to execute, and they should be easy for you to explain. So visuals can be used as a form of engagement, and I really do encourage you to take on other ways to engage your audience, especially in a virtual space where you don't have as many dimensions to be able to engage your audience. When you are in a live environment, when you are face-to-face, moving around your space or taking time to look amongst your audience, so they sometimes call it that three-part method, where you're looking at one section, looking in the middle, and then looking at the next section. Those are all really great ways to engage. But in both environments, virtual or in person, making eye contact is key. It commands your audience's attention. Not reading is also key. It commands your audience's attention. And then visual aids are incredibly important to reiterate your ideas and to send your message in a way that's engaging but not distracting. So your visual aids should not be more interesting than you are. I'll say that again. Your visual aids should not be more interesting than you are. If your visual aids are more interesting, you need to scale back on your visuals and work on your delivery. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk about within delivery and execution is preparing for different modalities. I'm going to apply this to public speaking in general, and then I'm going to also apply it to the pitch assignment. Modalities are different ways to deliver your message. And in this virtual space, we know that we're having to deliver on camera. And in a pitch environment, you may have to deliver on camera in a group. So if you are delivering on camera in a group setting, you need to have a back channel of communication amongst your group so that you're not communicating issues or things that you need to do in the presentation itself. So that's where you have a secondary source, like a cell phone, that you have as a backup option where you can text and send messages to your group that you're communicating or that you're presenting with, so that you guys understand what you should be doing without having to say, hey, group member number 3, it's your time to talk, right? That wouldn't be the way that you would approach it. Instead, you would send a text message and say, you're going to cover, make sure that you cover solution, or you're going to answer that question. Let's talk about that aspect, question and answer, in a modality where you're presenting in a virtual space as a group. You should also discuss who's going to answer what type of question. So everyone in the group should know exactly where they're going to be placed in the question answer session. So if there's a question about revenue, then there should be one person in the group who addresses that. If there's a question about execution, there should be one person in the group that's going to answer that. So all of those things need to happen in advance. The best way that you can be an excellent public speaker, especially if you don't do it all the time, is preparation beforehand. If you prepare before, meaning knowing the structure to how to answer questions, knowing your actual organization structure, meaning following a structure and preparing for that in advance, understanding how to meet your time requirements, creating really great visual aids that don't take away from you, but also keep your audience engaged. Those are all really great things to do in advance. They should be practiced and prepared for before you give your presentation. Now, also in a virtual space, I want to talk about this in reference to your pitch. Your modality may affect the timing of your pitch, right? So you may need to change your 6-minute pitch to an elevator pitch depending on the modality. And we all know in virtual space, sometimes we think that we're going to have 20 minutes to speak, and it doesn't work out that way because there are technical difficulties. So you should think about how you can make your 6-minute pitch a 30-second or 60-second pitch if you need to. And how you would do that is scale down to specific areas: attention getter, the exact problem, the exact solution, the best benefit, and the clear call to action. So a great public speaker is able to adjust based on the circumstances, and our modalities oftentimes affect that. So if you want to prepare for virtual, speaking or in-person speaking, it's super important that you prepare in advance. Also get a formula or a structure down as I presented with the motivated sequence. Also make sure that you understand the format structure for question and answer, have that clear and established, and practice with keywords. Don't write out your presentation word for word. And I'll tell you, some people think, well, okay, I can do it. Unless you have tons of time for memorization, do not do that, because as soon as you get nervous, you're going to look at that piece of paper and start reading, okay? If you have plenty of time to memorize your manuscript, or you've been doing this a long time, then that may be a different situation. But for most public speakers, having keynotes instead of content written out word for word is the best approach to have great, engaging, extemporaneous delivery. Now, I want to talk about what the Speaking Center can do for you as students if you're preparing for a presentation or as you're preparing for your pitch perfect assignment. The Speaking Center is a free on-campus resource that will provide you practice, tips, and helps in organization and delivery for any type of oral presentation. You can schedule a session through so if you see quick link, as you can see, quick links there allows you to search Speaking Center, but you can also type in concordia.edu/Speaking Center to go directly to the web page. And then there is an area where it says virtual services. Under that is a link to an actual appointment scheduler. You select the scheduler and you can select an appointment from Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. to schedule coaching with me specifically for any help that you need in presenting your ideas. So I especially if you have lots of anxiety associated with public speaking, I do recommend coaching for help. And coaching can be through an avenue like the Speaking Center, but also Toastmasters is another example of a great way to coach. If you have real anxiety about public speaking, the best thing that you can do is face it and find a way to get coaching in it, not expect that it's going to go away, because we all have to speak in public at some point in time. And the better you get at it, the easier it will be. So here at Concordia campus, we offer coaching through the Speaking Center directly with me. You make an appointment and you can do so. But if you also want to improve in your speaking in other areas of your life, and let's say maybe you're out of college, Toastmasters is also another great resource to use to improve your public speaking skills. So, if you've noticed, I went through this structure of explaining how to present, and my last call to action was to hope that you make an appointment with the Speaking Center at some point so that I can actually see your lovely faces and help you with coaching. If you have any questions along the way, you can also send me an email, danielle.walker@concordia.edu, if you just want to ask a quick question. And coaching, as I said, can be in any area of oral communication, and it can be for any class. It doesn't have to be just for a communication class or a business class. It can be in any class, or if you need help with interviewing, preparing for an internship or a job while you're in college or getting ready to graduate, the Speaking Center can also help you with that. So I appreciate this opportunity to share with you all of this content, and now it's time for me to take your questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Danielle. And I will say to all of you students that if you do have a presentation coming up, going in to get that coaching really does give you a competitive advantage. When we had the Incubator CTX Pitch Perfect last year, the teams that came in from coaching really benefited. I could see the difference. The judges could see the difference. Also, the Persuasion Contagion winners that I've seen, I know have gone for coaching. So just little things, you know, when we were in person, walking around the stage, stopping in a certain spot to look at people. Now virtually it's going to be different, right? You're talking about keeping your eye contact. That's important. As Danielle talked about, it could be having that back channel. I know I do that all the time, whether it's text or Slack. increasingly these webinars or contests are like a production. They're like a mini production. And so you need to have this other whole way of communicating, just like you would have, your lighting people and your backstage people and this whole crew of people setting up the production. We don't necessarily have that, but we have to make do, and we have to plan for those eventualities. So it is different, but there is a way to do it effectively. So if you have questions, please go ahead and type those in the chat. I'll be looking at those. I wanted to start out with one question for Danielle, which is, we were talking about presenting in a group, but how do you handle a pitch if you are giving that pitch by yourself? What are some tips there?
So thank you for that question. That's a great question. If you are doing the pitch on your own, then you would still follow that same structure. So having the attention getter to the call to action would still be the structure that you would follow. And you just would change your attention getter slightly. It wouldn't involve a team vision or a team story. It would be an individual vision and an individual story. But everything else would follow that exact same structure. And you would still follow all the same delivery requirements. I didn't mention this before, but I should say that when you're working as a group, you should have transitions, right? So one group member should transition to the next. That really allows for seamless delivery. But if you are doing a pitch on your own, then you should have transitions, as I did when I was presenting, saying those are the problems. Now let's move on to the solution. Now let's talk about the call to action. So transitions are still required. All the components are still required. Even if you're doing a solo, if you're pitching in a solo environment, as I established in the previous example for a group. But the biggest thing is that you want to make sure that your pitch is engaging, whether you're presenting as a group or you're presenting individually. Having that engagement is super important. So that's what I would recommend for individual presentations.
Great. So the next question has to do with transitions. Do you have any best tips for transitioning from one group member to another doing a presentation? Is there any standard handoff, verbal or nonverbal cue that you recommend?
That's a great question. So if you are the person speaking, you're transitioning to the next person, it should be your responsibility to do the introduction for the next person. So you summarize what you're saying. For example, if you're talking about revenue, you'd say, so now that you know a little bit about revenue, let me pass it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to execute, right? And then Sarah doesn't have to introduce herself, right? She's going to explain execution. And then whoever goes after Sarah, Sarah would say, so now you understand a little bit about execution. Now let's talk about, now George is going to talk about budget. So transitions should be the person who's speaking's job is to summarize what they're talking about and introduce the next person. And you do that all the way subsequently until you get to the last person.
Thank you. So with team introductions, should one person introduce the team slide, or should each person on the team introduce his or himself?
That's a great question. I recommend one person does the introduction. I don't think that having each person introduce themselves works well as far as delivery and structure. I think it's best to have one person in the group execute each area. So if the person who's doing the attention getter should do the introduction of the group and explain the background of everyone.
Great. Do you recommend having a backup presenter for each section in case of technical difficulties?
I do recommend a backup and a backup to a backup, especially in a technical environment. Yes, always have a backup plan. Anything that you can, if something goes wrong, always have a plan A, B, and C. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would add to that it's important that everybody has a copy of the presentation, because sometimes people can't come into Zoom or their sound doesn't work or something like that. And if they're the one that has the PowerPoint and nobody else has it, then you can't show it. So
Absolutely.
I like to set it up that everybody can share the screen. So if somebody needs to jump in, they can.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's see what else. Can you tell us about anything that you've seen specifically in virtual presentations that really distinguishes one group from another that you thought was a really good thing to do?
Yes. So to go back to piggyback off of what you said about everybody having access to the PowerPoint, I find that that is really a great an indicator of professionalism and preparation, so that everyone is speaking off of and working off of the same streamlined document. I feel like that is really great versus everyone in the group having their own individual portion that they're presenting that's not cohesive, and it doesn't look the same. It doesn't have the same formatting and the same coloring. I really think that what distinguishes a group that seems incredibly professional is that they've all worked off of the same document, and their presentation is streamlined from one person to another. So if you're working as a group, I would recommend working together, not everybody doing their own individual project and then coming together at the last minute and trying to piece it together.
Great. And we have a question about, can you speak a little bit about lighting, camera angle, etc., in a virtual environment?
Thank you
I
for
think
that
I might add to
question.
that too. What about, dressing up or dressing in a similar color scheme, or any recommendations about that as well?
That's a great question. So I'm going to start with addressing the lighting. Lighting is incredibly important in a virtual space. If your audience can't see you, or you're in a virtual environment and your lighting's not great and your audience is not able to see you, that really impedes with your delivery. So making sure that you have really great lighting, which I recommend placing your camera in front of a window, is a really great way to get natural lighting, or to get a ring light if you have that, or some form of lighting that allows you to show up well on camera. Also, making sure that you have a neutral background space, so an environment that's behind you where people can't walk through. That's super important, and that it's not distracting. And what I mean by distracting is that if you have something in the background, your audience should not be able to read it. Okay, so if they can read it and look at it in detail in that way, then it's distracting. Try to have a neutral background to go along with what I said as far as delivery is concerned, that doesn't take away from you, that doesn't distract away from you. And as far as clothing, from your waist up, you should be professional, right? It should be clothing that you would wear in the face-to-face environment. Even though you're at home, you still need to present well. So absolutely wear professional clothing. And if you are working for your presentation as a group, then you should be professional in the same way. So having some kind of theme about, we're going to be business casual, or we're going to wear button up or sweaters or something like that. You don't have to wear the same colors, but you should be cohesive in your style of dressing, to make sure that, if you're all casual, great, but you should all be casual. If you're all professional, great, you should all be professional. There has to be cohesiveness when you are presenting as a group. That says that you're prepared and that you're professional.
Okay, so how do you suggest we handle an interruption, like a phone ringing, someone entering the room, etc.?
That's a great question. And I've experienced that myself. And what you do not want to do if there's an interruption is to pretend like it never happened. So if your kid runs in, don't push them away and not say anything. Just say, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry for that interruption, and make a light joke and get back to it, right? If a phone rings, apologize for it. Excuse me, my phone's ringing, I'm at home, address it and get back to your presentation. An interruption shouldn't throw you. It happens, right? We're at home, a lot of us are at home, but you want to always make sure that you address that, that happened and that everyone saw it, and then get back to your presentation.
Great. I think that was our last question. So again, if any of you students want to go schedule an appointment with Danielle, she's happy to do that. And she has a link on her website where you can set up an appointment virtually. And how can you walk us through how those sessions work? You're doing those virtually. So how does that, walk us through what that looks like?
Thank you. That's a great question. So you would sign on to, or you would log into the sign up page, and it doesn't require a login. You would just click to schedule an appointment, and it'll ask you for your name and your email address. And then that will give me notification that you booked an appointment. I will respond to that message with your Zoom meeting link, and then you will use that link to meet with me virtually. And then when you select the scheduler, it'll give you a range of time. The coaching sessions are 25 minutes, and usually that's sufficient time to cover whatever question or coaching appointment that you need. But if you do need to schedule a follow-up appointment, you can always do so, or you can schedule 2 back-to-back if you feel like you need more than 25 minutes. But I will always respond to your you booking the appointment with a Zoom meeting link where you'll be able to meet with me face-to-face, virtually face-to-face.
Great. And one final question, do people send you their material in advance, or do you like to look at it during the scheduled time?
However you want to go about it is fine. I know sometimes you don't have time to prepare your content and your information in advance. So if you just have it ready during the appointment, you can always share your screen with me, and we can look through the content in that way. So a lot of times students share their outline with me, and then I help them complete their outline during the scheduling appointment. Or you can send me your outline in advance, and then you can spend your time, your coaching time, just delivering the content while I have the structure to follow. So it's whatever works best for you. There's no requirements as far as how you can go about your coaching. Consider your coaching sessions whatever you need for whatever you have to do.
Great. So we have one more question that just came in. What's the difference between certain types of pitches, like elevator pitches or sales pitches?
So a sales pitch is specific to selling an idea, and it's usually longer than an elevator pitch, which is really quick. Elevator is an idea of a pitch that you can give going from one floor to another on an elevator, right? So that's a 30 to 60-second pitch, which should be really concise and clear about your problem, solution, benefits, and call to action. A sales pitch is more detailed, as I showed in the slides during my presentation, that allows you to talk about competition, that allows you to give milestones. So the pitch format is always the same. The difference is that some can be longer than others, right? So you're gonna always address the same points, but if you have a sales pitch, a longer sales pitch, then you have time to elaborate on your points. If you have an elevator pitch, you may not have as much time to elaborate on your points. That's the difference.
Great. Well, thank you, Danielle, for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate everything that you taught us. And all the students and others who joined us today, thanks so much for participating. We hope that everybody stays in good health and in good spirits in the coming weeks. Hopefully everybody will get their vaccine soon. And we are penciling in next February 2022 for IncubatorCTX Pitch Perfect, again in the chapel. So fingers crossed. But in the meantime, let's keep working on our presentation skills. The better we get at this virtual environment, the more successful we'll all be. So again, thanks so much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all.